Even in the flickering neon of a broken city, there is a path toward redemption for those brave enough to walk it. Witness the powerful transformation of lives once lost, now finding their purpose in the glow of the truth. Hit subscribe now and let the light lead the way.
The ribs had been smoking since 7 that morning. I'd been up before dawn, seasoning the rack the way my father taught me, the way I'd done every birthday for as long as I could remember. 65 years old, and I still cooked my own birthday dinner. Some habits aren't worth breaking. My daughter Patrice had called 3 times that week offering to cater. I told her no each time. There are things a man does himself, and his own birthday meal is one of them. My son Daniel drove up from Chicago on Friday evening, pulling into my apartment parking lot in a rented SUV that probably cost more per day than my electric bill. He hugged me the moment he stepped out, still in his dress shirt from the flight, smelling like airport coffee and expensive cologne. 65, he said, shaking his head like the number personally offended him. You don't look a day over 63. Flattery from an architect, I said. The most useless kind. He laughed and carried his bags upstairs while I checked the smoker on the balcony. My apartment isn't much, 2 bedrooms, 2nd floor, East Knoxville. But I'd lived there 11 years and knew every creak and every floorboard. Patrice arrived at 6 with her husband Raymond and a store-bought potato salad. Raymond shook my hand with both of his and asked about my knee. I told him it was fine. He asked again. I told him it was still fine. Raymond is the kind of man who asks questions he already knows the answers to, then listens to your response like he's taking notes for a future deposition. I've never known what to do with him. And after 15 years, I've stopped trying. We ate on the balcony. All 4 of us crowded around my folding table with paper plates and sweet tea. The ribs came out perfect. Daniel talked about a development project in Milwaukee, mixed-use condos, something about LEED certification and green rooflines. Patrice nodded at all the right moments and refilled everyone's tea without being asked. She was good at making herself useful in ways that kept her slightly apart from the actual conversation. I'd noticed that about her for years, but never thought much about it until later. It was Daniel who broke the rhythm. He set down his fork, looked at me with that expression he gets when he's been waiting to say something. "Dad," he said, "I've been meaning to ask. Have you had any problems with the house? The inspector signed off in March, but sometimes older properties have quirks in the first year." I looked up from my ribs. "What house?" Daniel blinked. "The one on Sycamore Hill. The one I bought you." The words landed between us, like something dropped from a height. "Son," I said carefully, "I live here. I've lived here for 11 years. I don't know anything about a house on Sycamore Hill." The table went quiet. Not the comfortable kind that follows a good meal, but the kind that arrives when something has gone wrong, and everyone is waiting to see exactly how wrong it gets. Daniel turned slowly toward Patrice. Raymond studied his potato salad with the focused intensity of a man who has suddenly discovered a profound interest in mayonnaise. Patrice's face changed. I have known that face for 37 years. I watched it learn to read, watched it cry at her mother's funeral, watched it beam at her wedding. I knew every version of it. What I saw right then I had never seen before, not guilt exactly, but something older and heavier, like guilt that had been carrying weight for a long time and was finally exhausted. "Patrice," Daniel said, his voice dropping to something controlled and quiet. "Where is Dad's house?" She stood up slowly, picked up her plate, and walked inside without a word. Raymond pushed back his chair. "I left something in the car," he said, which was so obviously false that it didn't even qualify as a lie. He was gone in 10 seconds. Daniel and I sat on the balcony in the May evening air, ribs going cold between us, listening to the sound of nothing from inside my apartment. "How much?" I asked. $240,000, Daniel said. "I wired it to her account in February. 14 months ago. $180 for a house near here, $60 for furnishings, and a year of expenses so you could settle in without any financial stress." He exhaled slowly. "She told me you'd chosen the property together, that you were excited about the neighborhood. I had not chosen any property. I had not been excited. I had spent the last 14 months driving a 2009 Civic with a cracked dashboard and lying awake occasionally wondering whether the water heater would hold through another winter. "Let me talk to her," I said. I found Patrice at the kitchen sink, running water over nothing, her back to me. "Tell me," I said. She turned off the water. She didn't turn around. "I'll explain everything, Dad. I just need a minute. Tell me right now." She did turn then, and I saw she'd been crying quietly, no performance, no drama, just wet eyes and a very tight jaw, the way she'd always cried since she was small. "Mason got sick," she said. "Mason, my grandson, 14 years old at the time, tall for his age, played basketball on the school team, had his mother's stubbornness and what my late wife always called my smart mouth. He had sat at this same kitchen table the previous Christmas, trying to teach himself a card trick he'd seen on his phone, failing 3 times in a row and refusing to give up. "Sick how?" I asked, though something in my chest already knew this was going to be a serious answer. "Leukemia," she said. "Acute lymphoblastic. Last January. The oncologist at UT Medical said there was a clinical trial at Vanderbilt, a new immunotherapy protocol. The early numbers were really promising, but the trial cost," she pressed her lips together, $188,000. Insurance called it experimental. They covered 11,000 of it. I sat down at my kitchen table. "We had 48 hours to pay the deposit or lose Mason's slot," she said. "There were 12 slots in the whole country. 12 children. If we missed the window, it would be another 18 months before the next cohort opened, and the doctors said—" She stopped, composed herself. "They said he might not have 18 months without it." I thought about Mason. Last Christmas at this table, that card trick, the patience of the thing, even failing, trying again. "Raymond's parents gave everything they had," she continued. 30,000. We liquidated our savings, 22,000. I sold my car. I borrowed what I could from friends. After 2 days of calling everyone I knew, I had $58,000. She looked at me. I was still 130,000 short with 6 hours left on the clock, and then Daniel's wire came. I said, "Yes." Her voice was barely a sound. $240,000, labeled as a gift for your housing fund. I had 6 hours. Mason had a 14% survival rate without the trial. She looked at me directly for the first time. "Dad, what would you have done?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have an answer somewhere, because I didn't trust it yet. "I told myself I'd pay it back," she said. "As soon as the treatments were done, as soon as Mason was stable, I'd find the money. I bought a real house. I want you to know that. I actually bought a house. On Sycamore Hill, with the $50,000 that was left after Mason's treatment, plus a mortgage. The house exists. You could have lived in it, but I was afraid to tell you what I'd done. And the months went past and the debt kept growing, and I kept thinking I'd pay Daniel back first and then explain, and then nothing," I said. "Then nothing," she agreed. I sent her home. I told her I needed to think and that she should go. Daniel stayed. We sat up until after midnight, going through everything on his phone, the wire transfer record, the property tax database, the address, the timeline, 14 months of silence laid out in digital records. The house on Sycamore Hill was real. 3 bedrooms, 1 story, quiet street 4 miles from my apartment, title in Patrice's name, purchased 11 months ago, currently occupied by a retired couple paying $900 a month. She had been collecting rent on a house purchased with money meant for me. "I want to see it," I said. We drove over at midnight. I am not proud of that, but we did it. The house was dark and still, the tenants long asleep. Porch light on, flower boxes under the windows, a welcome mat that said home in block letters, small and well kept, and exactly the kind of place I might have picked for myself if anyone had asked me, which made standing in front of it at midnight on my 65th birthday feel considerably worse than I had expected. "What do you want to do?" Daniel asked. "I want to understand it first," I said. "Then I'll decide what to do." By Thursday morning, I had made 2 calls and sent 1 email. The first call was to Gerald Park, an old friend who had retired from investigative work 3 years ago, but still kept his network active out of what I suspected was pure inability to stop. The second call was to Oswald Briggs, a real estate attorney I knew from the neighborhood association, a man whose garage I had rewired at cost years ago, and who owed me a favor I was now ready to collect. The email was to Daniel. "Stay patient. Don't move yet," Gerald called back Friday. "The boy was diagnosed January 9th, he said. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, confirmed at UT Medical. Referred to the immunotherapy trial at Vanderbilt. Enrollment deadline was January 23rd. The trial costs check out exactly as she described, $188,000. Insurance covered 11. I pulled the payment records from the hospital's billing portal. The deposit came in on January 23rd at 4:47 in the afternoon. A pause. That's about 6 hours after Daniel's wire transfer cleared. And Mason? I asked. What's his condition now? Last scan on file was 6 weeks ago, Gerald said. Full remission. The treatment worked. I sat with that information for a long time after we hung up. Then I drove to Sycamore Hill and parked across from the house and looked at it from the street. 35 years as a master electrician will change how you see buildings. I don't look at walls. I see what runs behind them, how power moves through a structure, where signal travels, what can be controlled and from how far away. My old crew used to say I could read a house the way some men read a newspaper. They weren't wrong. The house on Sycamore Hill had been updated during renovation, with a standard smart home package, automated lighting, thermostat control, a wireless intercom system, a front door camera, and speaker. Common installer, common platform, the kind of system I had helped write specifications for a dozen times in my final years at the utility company. I knew that platform. The way I knew my own handwriting. I called Franklin Webb, who had spent his last decade at the utility running the smart home integration division and now ran a consulting business from his garage in Maryville. Franklin, I said. Hypothetically, if a property owner needed to access the automated systems in a home they legally own, but the current tenants were unavailable to provide physical access, what would the procedure be? Franklin was quiet for a moment. Hypothetically, if the owner had the original install codes from the property documentation, they could interface remotely through the manufacturer's cloud platform. No physical entry required. And if the property documentation were accessible through the county assessor's portal? Howard, Franklin said. Are you trying to haunt a house? I am exploring my professional options, I said. He laughed for a long time. Then, I'll be over Saturday morning. We spent Saturday afternoon mapping the system. I want to be clear about something, because I know how this sounds. I had no interest in disturbing Earl and Beverly Simmons, who were by all accounts perfectly decent tenants who kept the yard neat and brought cookies to the block party. Every system we accessed was exterior. The front porch intercom, the driveway camera, the motion sensor lights, the front door speaker. Nothing inside the house. Nothing that touched the tenants' lives. This is the most legally ambiguous thing I've helped with since 1994, Franklin said, eating one of my ham sandwiches at my kitchen table. The property owner authorized access to their own systems, I said. You're not the property owner. The property owner purchased the property using my money. I would argue that creates a constructive interest in the automation credentials. You could argue that to a judge after they charged you with something creative, he said. But he kept working. At 63, a man needs something interesting to do on a Saturday or he goes to seed. I mailed Patrice an anonymous letter the following Wednesday, typed at the library and mailed from 2 towns over. It said, "The house remembers who it was meant for. You should go see it. Alone. No signature. No return address." She called me that same evening, voice perfectly normal, asking how I was doing. I mentioned the weather. She asked about my knee. I said it was fine. Neither of us said a word about any letter. Friday morning, my camera feed showed her car in the driveway. She'd come alone, spoken briefly to Earl at the door, walked around to the garden on the side of the house. I watched her on my laptop screen from my kitchen. She stood among the flower beds for a while, looking at the house, looking tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I activated the front porch speaker remotely. Static, first the system waking up, and then my own recorded voice, calm and deliberate. This was supposed to be my home. Patrice. On the camera feed, she went absolutely still. Then she walked quickly to her car and was gone in under a minute. I don't know if what I felt right then was satisfaction. It wasn't quite that. It was something sharper and less comfortable. I kept the system live anyway. Over the following 2 weeks, she drove past the house 4 times. Slow passes in the evening, sometimes stopping at the corner to sit for a few minutes before moving on. Once she parked and stood on the sidewalk staring at the house for a long time in the dark. I watched all of it on the camera feed from my apartment. And I want to be honest. There were moments I reached for the keyboard to disable everything, and moments I pulled my hand back. I told myself it was justice. I wasn't entirely convinced. Franklin came by on a Thursday evening and found me watching the feed. He looked at the screen and didn't say anything for a minute. "She looks hollowed out," he said finally. "She stole from her father," I said. "She stole from her father to save her son from dying." "Yes," I said. "Both of those things are true." He poured himself coffee without asking. Sat down. "Howard, you measured twice and cut once for 35 years. You never left a loose connection. That was your whole professional reputation." He looked at the screen. "What exactly is the connection you're trying to complete here?" I didn't have a good answer. 3 days later, Mason called my cell phone. He had never called me directly in his life. I answered, surprised. "Grandpa," he said. His voice was deeper than I remembered. 17 now, which made sense because I hadn't seen him since before the birthday dinner. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Really good," he said. 6-month scans came back clean. "Doctor says the numbers are better than they expected." A pause. "But Grandpa, Mom's having a hard time. She doesn't know I'm calling. She cries when she thinks no one's listening, and Dad doesn't know how to help, and I'm—" He stopped. "I don't know what happened between you two. She won't say. But she looks the way she looked when they first told me I was sick, and I just thought you might want to know that." I sat in my kitchen after we hung up for a long time. Long enough for the sun to move noticeably through the window. Then I called Franklin. "Shut it down," I said. "All of it. Already done," he said. Which meant he'd been waiting for me to make that call. I went to Oswald Briggs the following week, laid out everything: the wire transfer, the property documents, the medical bills Gerald had obtained, the timeline. Oswald reviewed it carefully, then set down his reading glasses. "You have a solid civil claim," he said. "Your son can pursue breach of fiduciary duty. She was given funds with a stated purpose and diverted them. It would likely result in a court order to transfer the house to Daniel's name, or full restitution." "What does that look like for them financially?" I asked. "They're already carrying significant medical debt," he said. "A civil judgment on top of that would be very serious." "I won't dress it up." I looked out his office window at the street below. A woman was walking with a small child, holding his hand, letting him set the pace. "She saved her grandson's life," I said. "She stole to do it," Oswald said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive things." "No," I said. "They're not." I drove to Patrice's house that evening without calling first. "Just knocked," Raymond answered, and for once, asked nothing about my knee. He looked at my face and stepped back and let me in without a word, and I heard him quietly close a door somewhere in the back of the house. Patrice was in the kitchen. She turned when she heard me, and she looked exactly as Mason had described, braced for something, running on not enough sleep. "Sit down," I said. We sat at her kitchen table. Same table we'd shared Christmas dinners for 15 years. "I know about January 9th, I said. "The diagnosis, the trial at Vanderbilt, the 48-hour window, the 11,000 insurance covered. I know you raised what you could and came up 130,000 short." Her hands went flat on the table. "I know Mason is in full remission," I said. "And I know it's because of what you chose to do." A long silence. "You should have told me," I said. "That same night, when Daniel's wire hit your account, you should have called me first." "I know," she said. "You should have called Daniel and told him the truth. He would have helped you properly. You know that," Raymond said. She stopped. We were terrified. We weren't thinking straight. And once I'd done it It was easier month after month to pretend I was going to fix it before anyone found out. I kept thinking. You kept thinking it would resolve itself, I said. It doesn't. Problems don't resolve themselves. I taught you that. You did, she said quietly. You did teach me that. I took the letter from my jacket pocket and put it on the table in front of her. She read it. I watched her face move through it. The letter said that the house on Sycamore Hill would be voluntarily deeded to Daniel's name, since that was whose money had purchased it. That in exchange, we would make no civil claim, demand no restitution, pursue no legal action. That Daniel had agreed to rent the house to her family at below market rate for 5 years, which would give them time to stabilize and begin addressing the medical debt properly. That this offer was available for 7 days and would not be extended. That it reflected mercy, not absolution, and that I understood the difference between those two things. That I did not know yet how to forgive her, but that I was trying to understand her. And that was the most honest thing I could put in a letter. She set the letter down. Her hands were shaking. Dad, she said. The voice from the house. The intercom. That was you? Yes. How? 35 years in electrical systems, I said. The manufacturer's cloud platform. Original registration credentials from the assessor's documentation. I paused. You always underestimated how much I actually know about this kind of thing. She made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob, and landed somewhere between the two. I thought I was going out of my mind. I know. I'm not entirely proud of that part. Yes, you are, she said. A little bit. I didn't argue with her. Because she wasn't wrong. She signed the settlement papers 6 days later. Oswald handled the transfer quietly. The house on Sycamore Hill changed hands on a Tuesday. No ceremony. Daniel called me that evening from Chicago. I don't want to be a landlord, Dad, he said. I'm going to offer to sell it to her at cost in 5 years, once she's gotten the debt under control. That's generous, I said. It's practical, he said. I designed buildings my whole career. I know what it means when the foundation is cracked. You fix it, or you lose the whole structure. He was talking about the house, and he wasn't talking about the house. September came. Mason drove over to see me on a Saturday, his first time behind the wheel on his own, handling it carefully on surface streets like someone who understood that competence is earned. He sat at my kitchen table and ate 3 ham sandwiches and told me about going back to school, about the basketball team, about how the ordinary parts of days felt different now that he'd spent months being aware they could be taken away. Everything feels more real, he said. Like, I pay attention to things I used to ignore. The way light comes through the window in the morning. The way food tastes. He looked up at me. Does that make sense? Or is that weird? That's exactly right, I said. That's about as right as it gets. He helped with the dishes. When he left, he hugged me in the doorway, long, genuine. The kind of hug you can't perform. Before he pulled away, he said, quietly, Grandpa, whatever happened with you and my mom, thank you for not making it permanent. I watched him back the car out of the lot carefully, hands at 10 and 2. The way I'd taught him in an empty parking lot when he was 10 years old and had asked me out of nowhere if I would show him someday. Patrice called me in October. First time we'd spoken directly since I'd sat at her kitchen table. I'm not expecting things to go back to the way they were, she said. They won't, I said. I know. A pause. Mason's 6-month scans came back. The doctors are writing a paper about his treatment response. He might help other kids eventually. Other families. I sat with that. A choice made in desperation. Wrong and desperate, and possibly saving lives she would never know about. That's good news, I said. That's genuinely good news. We talked another 10 minutes about nothing much. When we hung up, I sat by the window and looked at the parking lot where my new car sat. A 2021, second-hand, clean interior, no cracked dashboard. Daniel had insisted in August. I'd replaced it, finally, because at 65 a man ought to stop waiting for the right moment to take care of practical things. I thought about what I would have done. 48 hours, 130,000 short. Mason in that hospital bed, with his 14%. A wire transfer landing in my account like something sent by the wrong kind of fate. I would like to think I would have made the phone call, asked for help, Done it the right way. I'm not certain I would have. Certainty about what you'd do in an impossible situation is something I've learned to distrust in myself. What I know is that I raised a daughter who, when everything collapsed at once, made a terrible choice in service of love. That the terribleness and the love were inseparable from each other. That untangling them was going to take more time than I had expected when I sat at the kitchen table the night of my 65th birthday and first heard the words, "What house?" A few weeks before Thanksgiving, I mailed a package to Mason. Inside was a small wooden box I'd built in the garage over a few evenings. Dovetail corners, his initials carved into the lid, a piece of the same oak I'd used to build his mother's childhood bookshelf 30 years ago. No note. He would know where it came from. 2 weeks after that, a card arrived at my apartment in his handwriting. It said, "I'm going to keep things that matter in here. Thanks, Grandpa. I'm glad you're still around." I set the card on my shelf, next to the photograph of my wife taken in 1989, the one where she's laughing at something, I said. Next to the water heater receipt from last November. Next to the small things that accumulate when a man lives in a place long enough to call it home. I don't know yet whether I'll forgive my daughter. Forgiveness might be the kind of thing you can't decide on. Only discover, one ordinary day, that it's already happened without you quite noticing. Or maybe it doesn't come at all. I've stopped pretending I know which way it's going to go. What I know is that Mason is alive, that Patrice is trying, that Daniel, all the way from Chicago, showed more grace than I might have in his position, that a boy who had a 14% chance is now sitting in a classroom somewhere, arguing about basketball, eating bad cafeteria food, and not thinking about any of this. Some of that happened because of what my daughter did wrong. Some of it happened because of what I chose not to do when I could have done worse. That's the honest accounting. I'm a man who spent 35 years making sure the current went where it was supposed to go. I understand systems. I understand that what runs through a family is harder to trace than electricity and doesn't follow the same rules. But it matters which direction it moves. And sometimes, that's the most you can say.